Up to this point, of course, we've been drawing lines down the middle of our objects. But we could ask what would happen if we drew lines a third of the way. I mean, what would happen if I cut a third of the way along the Mobius strip? Would I get one bigger twisted loop? 3 times as big maybe? Or maybe I get 3 new little twisted loops. Maybe something completely unexpected will happen. Anyway, before we do that, we actually have to draw on our markings so that we know where to cut. Did you do it? If not, pause and see what happens, because it's fun. So if you did draw the line out, what you should see is that as you get around one loop, you'll be on the other side of the paper and on the other third. And then as you continue back around, you'll end up back where you started. Now it's maybe a little easier to see this if I pull my Mobius strip apart again and then see what happened. As I went along there, when I go and I twist it and put back onto the other side, that will connect up with there, and then as I go along there, a half twist and putting it back to the other side will connect me back up to the beginning. Try it. Try doing it and cutting your Mobius strip. It'll actually make it much more visually easy to see. You could do the next question with a different color, and you would end up with more or less what you expect. Black line there and say a red line there, and on the other side you'd have a black line there and a red line there. Alright, so here's the biggie. What will happen when we cut along these third lines? Now don't let anybody start cutting without having a guess first. It's like reading the last page of a whodunit before you start the book. Make sure that everybody makes a guess about what's going to happen when we cut along those cut lines. Alright, but just so that you feel comfortable and you've seen it all, let's have a look at what happens. So if I take this and I start cutting along this cut line, what will I get? And the answer, we get a Mobius strip, and we get something very similar to what we had when we cut our original Mobius strip down the center. And they're looped together. It's kind of crazy. One good way to think about it is to imagine that you took your Mobius strip with these cut lines on it and you cut it, so that now you have this. Now imagine what would happen if you cut along those 2 cut lines, which is exactly what you're going to do if you're doing it normally. This center bit here is actually going to be connected to that center bit there, a la so. And you will see that once you cut these 3 strips, this middle strip will be connected to itself. And so that'll end up as just a 1/3 size of the original Mobius strip. And this top part of this will be connected to this bottom part of that, which will be connected to the top part of that. And so what you will end up with on these 2 bits is actually one big longer piece that now represents almost exactly what we got when we cut our original Mobius strip in half. In fact, one way to think about that is to imagine these 2 lines got closer and closer and closer together. You would end up with exactly what we got when we cut down the center of the original Mobius strip. Now the fact that they're connected like that when you do the cut, well, that requires a little bit more thinking of the mind, but at least it's easy enough to see why you end up with one copy of the original Mobius strip that's a third as width, and one copy of the plane that's flying over and above. One copy of the original Mobius strip that's a third as thin, and one copy of what happens when you cut the original Mobius strip in half, but it's a third as thin. I think what irks people about this, and if you're not irked by it, I think you're unusual, because I was certainly irked by it the first time I saw it. But I think what irks people about this is that we've done something symmetric. We've drawn these lines a third of the way, and then we've cut along them, and what we ended up with was something that wasn't symmetric. Namely, it was a little piece and a big piece, which is quite different to what would happen if we took the third of the lines on a cylinder and cut them. We just end up with 3 copies of the same thing. Or when we took our Mobius strip and cut that in half and ended up with one big thing, right? Anyway, plenty to dwell on, plenty for your speedy students to have a think about, Namely, if you've got an explorer that has gotten ahead of everybody else, ask them what would happen if they drew quarter lines and then cut, or drew fifth lines and then cut, or drew sixth lines and then cut. So many more different things for them to think about. Alright, pretty soon we'll come back with something completely different. Looking forward to the next handout.